28. So Matthew 7, verse 12 is where we are. So that, well, with the Proverbs class going ahead and taking place, that helps us to clearly know which direction we're going to go, type thing. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm open to anything that you might be interested in studying. One thought I had, somebody mentioned to me about 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. And that passage is a wonderful passage, but I don't really like to study those passages because it gets me in so much trouble as a preacher, because that's all about how a preacher ought to be. And so I don't know about 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. Of course, I'm just kidding. I love those books, but they are incriminating. And I was thinking also, I don't think since I've been here I've ever done a study on 1 Corinthians. So we might want to think about a study of 1 Corinthians, and if it tickles our fancy, we can carry on in 2 Corinthians. But that's something I'm thinking about. If you have something that you like better or something that you'd like to suggest, no guarantees. We'll look at it, consider it though. It might be something I hadn't thought of. But of course, now I call this lesson 28, the Everest of ethics. Everest, of course, being Mount Everest. Ethics. What do ethics have to do? What is, when we talk about things that are ethically right? What does it have to do with? I think of the word ought when I think of the word ethics. How ought I to be? That's kind of a way of phrasing it that I'm not used to doing it, or we're not comfortable with. But how should I ought to be, or what should we? It appeals to the idea of a level of expectation that ought to be natural to each and every individual, just by the fact that we're community. We talked about, it wasn't too long ago, that, and I don't know, there may be some places now, but we talked about how that there have been, they have found societies that have never been influenced by the West, who protect each other, who have home settings where the husband provides for his family, or there is a provider. They take care of each other. They're good to each other. Never heard of Jesus, never heard of the Bible, but yet there is a sense of moral uprightness, a sense of ethical uprightness. I suggest to you that the Ten Commandments fall into that category. When God gave Israel the Ten Commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me, don't, and of course, don't steal, kill, commit adultery. All of those 10 fall into the category of moral uprightness. They fall into ethical senses of duty. It's something that ought to be naturally right. Now, it's kind of funny, and we could spend a lot of time thinking about it, but pluralistic society, that is where my way is as good as your way and everything, think that the idea of one God was pre-existed by the idea of multiplicity of gods. In other words, we always thought that there were gods of, the wood, the floor, or the gods of the sun, But I would suggest to you that the idea of God that would be before that would be the idea of one God, that you would be thankful for everything that you have. And I think that's what God was trying to get a group of people who had been in Egyptian captivity back to. He wanted to get them back to a sense of one God. You can't put me in a thing. You can't make me. So don't make an image of me. All those appeal to what is morally upright, what is ethically right. So I'm saying all that to say this. When Jesus says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, this is the law of the prophets. Is the golden rule something that I ought to do whether God had said to do it or not? What? That's what. Now, he did say it, so it's kind of hard to get behind that, but...
Well, I mean, it's like this. I mean, I'm sitting here as you're talking. How do we know? Okay. Even if, when you stop thinking, you just made a statement there like, well, how would we know? Those people that don't know God. Because they live somewhere else and, you said that's who we're not. Okay. You look at the animals, and I would think that most of them, because it was Adam and Eve, so when I hope it took a while for everything to, how would, because they knew God and everything, but I mean, when people that don't know, never heard, if they look at nature within itself, how does the cow, how does a bird, how do they know? How did they come up with how to do it? And to treat their own. You look at apes, monkeys and stuff. They're a lot similar as far as the way they cuddle their young, they take care of each other, they protect each other. One gets a little bit more hierarchy than the other, pick and choosing. And every animal that's what they do. So, don't you think that, how can you deny that there's not one God that, or where, what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's all about the oneness, regardless of where you come from.
Yeah.
All of us. And how do they know not to kill somebody?
Right.
If it is killing, it's from a different thing, but it's not one cow killing another cow just because.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think we're in agreement with one another. I think what we're saying here is that there's something in us. We're born with it. And we're created that way. I think Jesus is not coming up with a new thing. And very fact, he said, this is the law and the prophets. On this hangs the law and the prophets. Was Jesus just trying to shore up the Old Testament here? No, he's just saying, look, this is the way it is. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it always will be. This is how you treat each other. You treat like you want to be treated. That is the mindset. Hey, Joe, load that song. I wanted to sing that song again this morning. I taught a new song last week, and it's really an old song. It was in the old Christian hymn number 2 song book. But let's sing that together. If you want a copy of it, I can get you a copy of it. But see if you can find that. So while he's looking for that, I'll just kind of catch us up a little bit. Well, he's here, so let's do it. Do you unto others as if they were you, and you were receiver of that which they do. Be free with your service, for life is a school, wherein you should live by the golden rule. Be honest and faithful, be truthful Have pity for others, their need bear in mind. Have mercy, be thoughtful, forget ridicule. For this is the goal of the golden rule. I love that song. I love the idea of it. And we need to adapt those kinds of things. And of course, we followed on in our study and talked about how that this is a law of morality. It's not because God said to do it, although God said to do it, or Jesus said to do it, but it is a part of our moral makeup. And so love motivates us to do those things. If you're a Christ follower, you're going to forgive like you want to be forgiven. If you're a Christ follower, you will help as you wish to be helped. You'll praise as you wish to be praised. You will understand as you wish to be understood. That's just going to be the way that you do things in your life. And so we went from there and talked about, kind of when the bell rang, we were right in the middle of a good example of different kinds of ways of thinking in the world today. We had the idea of the ironclad, the iron rule. You had the passive rule, and you had the golden rule being discussed in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Remember the story, Good Samaritan. What happens? A guy is on his way to Jerusalem, and he falls among thieves. So you got iron rule, passive rule, golden rule. Which one do they fall into? Obviously the iron rule. What's yours is mine. What's mine? Mine is mine. And I'll treat you any way that I want to treat you if I want what you've got. And so that's the iron rule. Then the second thing is we've got these two. You got these Levites, church leaders of that day, religious leaders. You got the Levite and you got the priest. And they're going down the road and they see the guy in the ditch. What do? They walk in the other side. So, iron rule, passive rule, golden rule. Certainly they're the passive rule. They're like, I'm busy. I got somewhere to go. I got something to do. They may think it's equally important. You know, is it a state law here that if somebody has a wreck, you've got to stop and help? Is that a law here? I know in a lot of the states, if somebody's had an accident, if anybody comes up on it, you could actually be held liable. And if you don't try to render some sort of aid. And so I would call that a golden rule kind of state, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Treat each other like you want to be treated. So you got this Samaritan that comes along, Samaritan of all people that nobody would ever think would do anything for us Jews because we hate them so bad they must be as sorry as we think. But yet he sees this guy in the ditch and he stops and he helps him. He, cleans his wounds, he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to the inn, he drops him off, he tells the guy, look, I'll come back if he incurs any more debt, I'll be happy to take care of it. So, iron rule, passive rule, golden rule. Obviously, golden rule is the kind of guy that we're dealing with here. I'll tell you a case in point. Hitchhikers. How many of us pick up hitchhikers? It may have been at one time you picked up, I've picked up hitchhikers in the past. I remember a time when you could pick up a hitchhiker and not really worry about it. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Well, see, that's rendering aid. That's being wise, I think.
Well, I mean, you know, I just don't want people to think that in their heads they've got to stop. We're very, very fortunate to have communications.
Yes, having a cell phone is wonderful. You can sit there on the side of the road and call. Even if you don't get out, you can call 911. So, yeah. It is a lot better than it used to be. But the principle, we understand the principle there. And of course, Jesus talks about, for this is the law and the prophets there. We got to understand that Jesus is not carving out a new ethical teaching. But here again, this is something that's always been. Leviticus 19, verse 18 says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So on one occasion, Jesus is asked, what's the most important law? What did Jesus say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He said the second one's likened to it. What did he say? Love your neighbor like you love yourself. On these two, what? Hang the law and the prophets. Well, these are the most important rules. I'd suggest to you this morning that love your neighbor like you love yourself is another way of saying Matthew 7, verse 12. Do you agree with that? Whatever you would that men should do to you, do even so to them. Would you see those as parallel verses? Anybody have an idea? Different? I mean, I think they're the same. And so Matthew 22:39, love your neighbor like you love yourself, is, I think, another way of saying, and of course, there's been all kinds of ways that we have said the same thing. Do unto others as you'd have them do to you. That's kind of the way I grew up learning it. That wasn't exactly the way he said it. It's more like the idea is you just want to treat people like you want to be treated. And it's and what I want you to see there is this is not a new thing. It's just been going on since the beginning of time. And I would suggest that even Adam and Eve, if they had Matthew 7:12 in their mind, they never would have taken of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You agree with that? God said, don't eat it and you'll die. Don't eat it, you'll die. See, a lot of times we read that and we think, oh, God just putting rules out there. No. I see that don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of evil as of the good and evil as being Johnny's running out to the street to get his ball, and there's a Mack truck coming. What's Johnny going to say? Or what's Mama going to say? Don't go out in the street, Johnny. God saw a Mack truck for humanity taking place, didn't he? Don't eat of that tree. It'll kill you. That was a real nice way to repay God for his good advice, don't you think? If they had thought, I want to treat God like I'd want to be treated, maybe the devil wouldn't have had his way that time. One thing that's different, though, with Jesus' teaching in the Old Testament is this. Jesus is a wonderful example of somebody who showed us how. Do you agree? He showed us how to pull this off. You know, if everybody had acted like Jesus, I think about that woman who was taken in adultery in John 8. You know, Jesus so could have easily have said, well, take her out and stone her. You know, because, I mean, that's what the law said. But what did Jesus do? Jesus treated this woman like he'd want to be treated. And was encouraging them to do the same. I think you can see that all the way through. Jesus ministry here upon this earth. How does he treat people? Well, he treats them like he'd want to be treated. And he does it perfectly, and he encourages us. 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 9 says this, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich." Man, that's a golden rule that Jesus lived out in his life. Comments? So let's apply it. I think the applications are endless. Whatever you want from somebody, let's just get real selfish here. What do you want from somebody else? Now, generally, we think of this verse and think about how we ought to treat other people. But can we think about it selfishly? What do you want? Well, I'd like forgiveness, thank you. Well, how ought I to be? I think I'd need to be a little more forgiving. If I was a little more forgiving, I might get more forgiveness, don't you think? What about affirmation? I want to be affirmed. I want people to recognize me for who I am. How do I do that? How do I pull that off? Do I stand outside with a banner saying, "See me, see me"? No, affirm others. I've got a friend. I'm telling you, he's a good friend of mine. And he is the most complimentary person, almost to a fault. In fact, sometimes he just irritates me because he's so nice. Because you know what it does? Every time he says something nice to me, I feel like I got to say something nice to him. You know? And it actually works. I am more complimentary because I'm around a guy that compliments me. And here's the thing. I've never figured out how to out-compliment him. He's that good at it. So, you know, if you want compliments, if you want affirmation, if you want people to listen to you, you don't just yell, "Listen to me." Be a listener. Listen to people. Because if you're more of a listener than a teller, people are going to be more apt to come to you and want to talk to you and want to get your ear. Something about listening. Best counselor you'll ever go to is a person who'll spend more time listening to what you got to say and less time about what he thinks or she thinks you ought to do about it. You want people to be tolerant of you? What do you got to do? You got to be a little more tolerant in your life. You want somebody to be patient with you? You got to be patient. I mean, this is. You want others to give you a benefit of the doubt, or you want other people to respond to you in a kind way, compassionate way. All these are settled right there in that one little verse. It's amazing how interaction is tempered by one little verse. Powerful. Think how its applications would transform marriages. If a couple could get down Matthew 7:12. I mean, just forgetting all the rest of them for a minute and just think about that one thing. How do you suppose that would help marriages? Whew. What about business relationships? Usually, if you're in the business world, what's it about? You're climbing the ladder of success, and whoever gets in your way, what? Kick them off. What about being kind in business? Well, you'll never get anywhere. Well, you trust in God, God's going to put you where you need to be. That's really what it's all about. Age groups and relationships. Parents want a better relationship with their children. Listen to what your child has to say. If you want them to listen to you, listen to what they're saying. I mean, it just works in so many different ways. Churches. Man, do you think about church splits that take place? No church, what do they say? No hurt like church hurt. But generally, and I'll hear of churches that'll say, well, we left them because they were, false teaching, or we left them because, and generally, if you dig a little deeper, you come to realize, at the end of the day, they didn't listen to each other. They weren't talking. They weren't communicating. They were talking at each other, not with each other. And Matthew 7:12 works in every area of life. And it's like Jesus just pulled it out of the air, threw it in his sermon. No, Jesus just reminded us of what is true to our nature. And then I've given you several verses here that we won't take time to look at, but Luke 6, Romans 13, all these have to do with this idea of the golden rule. Anybody have any comments? You were a little bit more vocal last week. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. There are, obviously, there are going to be some things that environment will teach you, but by and large, even in that process, there are some things that are innate with us, and I think that. Right. I look at children. I know children are born with an innate awareness of right and wrong because of the way that they react when they're abused. And sometimes it can destroy their lives. Sometimes they never can overcome it. There's something about the way parents ought to treat their children that, yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. I wish they were in here. I'd brag on them. But do you see the front of the bulletin this week? Those 3 precious children that the Shoemakes have adopted. I don't know what all they've had to deal with in life, but I would suggest to you there's been a lot of unfairness. And thanks be to God that there are people like the Shoemakes that say, okay, you might have been treated wrong, but I'm going to show you what's right. I'm going to demonstrate what good and right and moral correctness and oughtness looks like. I'm telling you, it just thrilled my soul when I heard. And every time I get around J.D. and Tracy, I'm like, how in the world do you guys do this? But they're good. And we got others around that do similar type things, and it just really thrills my heart to see the kind of thing. But yeah, I do agree that there are things they have to learn. But there are some natural things within them that, like, they naturally go with their mother. They actually want, that parenting connection type there. And I think that's a God thing. I think God makes them. Right. Right, right. So we're introduced to a man leaves his father and cleaves to his wife, they become 2 one flesh. it tells us what happens, but the reality of our humanity is seen when we've been pulled away from that. When we've been pulled away from that natural, God-made, yeah, He set it up. That's right. So, I think our society is one of the reasons we have the trouble we have is because no man in the home, or the man is not there, or the mother's not being responsible. Either, it's just all when you get out of God's original plan, one man for one woman for life, as long as you both shall live, you're taking a chance with God, and you're taking a chance with life, and you're taking a chance, especially with children involved. You're taking a chance with their lives. So, yeah. Anyway, so. Rather than going to the next lesson, let's just go ahead and look at some of these verses that would remind you of it, and then we'll go into the next lesson next week. But Luke 6 and verse 31, as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. This is kind of Luke's version of the idea. How about Romans 13, 8 and 9? Owe no man anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Loving your neighbor, love your neighbor like you love yourself. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And any other commandment are summed up in the words, you shall love your neighbor like you love yourself. Remember what I said about the Ten Commandments being God's moral law reinstituted? It's right to be that way no matter what. Colossians 3, 12 and 13, or to be the way God says. It's not He's not, and undoubtedly there's some things that God said that are hard for people to get right, but it's not something that can't be done. We can do what God says. Sometimes we don't want to do, but we can do what God says. Colossians 3, 12 and 13, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility. Can't you hear the golden rule in all these? Meekness, patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. All of these things are representative of community. If you have some interaction with one another, undoubtedly there are going to be times when problems arise. How do you deal with that? Well, I'm just going to take my ball and go home. Or I'll go somewhere else. No. We're family. And family does bicker and quarrel. Shouldn't, but we do. And when it happens, what do? We work through it. And because there's nothing worse than not being with family. Generally, we get mad and go home, take our ball and go home, and then we're sitting there going, man, I'm at home with my ball. Man, why did I do that?
But by working through it, this is how you're continually teaching. I mean, you're teaching constantly, not just children, but adults. Adults can look like we're doing with the intergenerational thing. We can look and see, and we can work together. That's constantly being
Yeah.
taught, and it's all positive. I mean, God.
The only thing I'd add to that is learning. We're teaching and learning. We're learning as we teach. That's right. Teaching and learning. That's right. So, Ephesians 4:2, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. Well, that's another way to say, doing to others as you'd have them do to you. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. That's that interactive kind of kindness. sharing. Philippians 2:4, let each of you look not only on his own interests, but on the interests of others. Being mindful of other people's needs is the best way to get the needs that you have met. 1 Peter 3:8-9. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. So, anyway, take that for what it's worth. We'll pick up in lesson 29, Lord willing, next week. Again, if you got some things that you'd like to discuss, just let's talk about it. Hope you'll be back tonight. We are having intergenerational tonight. And it'll be in the MPR. So y'all come plan, and I've got a study all worked up and ready for us to do.